Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into a wild story. One where text messages can turn into evidence, words can become weapons, and the line between who's a victim and who's a perpetrator gets really blurry.
So think about this for a second. Could a text message, just a few words typed on a screen, actually make you a murderer? It sounds crazy, right? Well, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at a true story that really pushes the limits of what we think of as legal responsibility. Okay, so let's talk about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For her whole life, everyone believed she was a very, very sick child. But the truth? It was so much more disturbing. See, the illness wasn't really hers. It was all in her mother's head. You see, Gypsy's mom had something called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Basically, she was the one who was sick, and her illness made her pretend her daughter was ill. And this wasn't just a small lie. We're talking a lifetime of deception, unnecessary surgeries, feeding tubes, shaved head. Gypsy was even forced into a wheelchair she didn't need. Her only way out, her only connection to the real world, was the internet, where she managed to start a secret online relationship. Now, her chats with her boyfriend started off totally normal. The usual, "Hi, how are you" stuff. Legally speaking, that's all just noise. Completely irrelevant. But then, the conversation took a turn. They started talking about her mom, and how she was the one big obstacle keeping them from ever being together. And right there, that's the moment their words started to mean something very, very different. And then came this one message. It basically laid it all out. As long as her mother was alive, they could never be together. That right there, that was the seed. That's the exact moment a desperate thought turned into what the law calls a common intention. It became a shared plan, a goal to get rid of the one person in their way.
So, the texts turned into phone calls, and pretty soon, they had a plan. Gypsy's part was to tell him exactly how and when to get into the house. Her other job? To just hide in a room while he did what he came to do. And he did. He murdered her mother, just like they planned. But then, something went wrong. Something they didn't plan. He also killed a neighbor who might have seen him.
And this is where it gets legally fascinating. Gypsy didn't touch the murder weapon. She wasn't even in the same room. So how on earth could she be guilty of murder? Is it possible that her words, just her words, are enough to legally tie her to what he did?
Well, the answer is yes, and it all comes down to a legal idea that exists in a lot of places. You can think of it like a conspiracy rule book. For our example, we're going to look at Section 8 of India's Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. This law spells out exactly when something said or done by one person in a plot can be used as evidence against everyone else in on it. So for this to work, for a text message to count against both people, it has to check 3 boxes. First, you have to prove there was a conspiracy to begin with. Second, the message or action has to happen after the plan was already in motion. And third, it has to be about that specific plan.
And that's exactly why all those early messages, the "hi, how are you" stuff, are totally useless in court. They don't matter. The legal clock started ticking the second Gypsy sent that message saying her mom was the obstacle. From that exact moment forward, every single text, every call about their plan became rock-solid evidence against both of them.
This is where you can really see the power, but also the limits of conspiracy law. Gypsy was on the hook for her mother's murder. Why? Because that was their common intention, their shared plan. But the neighbor? Nope. That was never part of their agreement. Her legal responsibility, the whole common intention thing, stopped the moment her mother was dead. She had nothing to do with that second impulsive act.
The legal idea behind all of this is something called the doctrine of implied agency. It's actually pretty simple when you break it down. Think of it like this. The moment you agree to join a conspiracy, you basically become a business partner, an agent for everyone else involved. So if one of your partners does something to move the plan forward, the law treats it as if you all did it together.
We see this play out perfectly in a really famous Indian case, often just called the post office case. Here's what happened. A guy was the lookout for a robbery. He just stood outside, never went in, never fired a weapon. But his partners inside ended up killing a guard. And guess what? The lookout was found guilty of murder too, because he was an agent in their plan. Their actions legally became his actions.
So when it's all said and done, this kind of evidence is a 2-for-1 deal for prosecutors. They use it first to prove, hey, look, a conspiracy actually happened. And second, they use it to point at a specific person and say, and you were part of it.
And always remember the magic number, 2. That's the bare minimum you need for a legal conspiracy. 2 people agreeing to do something illegal.
But what's really mind-bending is that those two people might not even know each other.
Yeah, seriously. Think about huge, complex plots like a terrorist network. You could have members who are total strangers. One person passes a message to someone they've never met, who then gives it to someone else. It doesn't matter one bit. As long as every single person is working towards that same end goal, that same common design, the law sees them all as one team of co-conspirators.
So, the big takeaway here is that words aren't just words. They can create a legally binding pact that makes you responsible for things you never even did with your own hands. And that leaves us with a really tough question to think about. In any kind of plan with another person, where does your responsibility stop and theirs begin?